Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining the quarantine sessions once again. I'm very excited about the session we are having today because we have a very super special guest who's going to talk to us about China and Chinese millennials, Chinese startups. Zak Dichtwald, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to get to talk with your community.
Yeah, Zach, so you're in New York right now, in your house, in quarantine as well. Tell us what is that like?
So I'm in a house. I'm not in my house. My house is in Beijing. About 10 weeks ago, I packed for a 1 week trip to the United States for I do a good amount of conference speaking, and I'm still living out of that same suitcase. So I was actually supposed to be in Wuhan for Chinese New Year.
Oh,
I was
wow.
shooting something with Tencent. My book is about to come out in China, and this is a really big year in China because the post 90s generation, the generation born after 90, and I'm right on the cusp of that. I'm 1990. We're about to turn 30. And so this
Right,
is like how people are realizing millennials are now having children. It's like, wait, you guys were supposed to be young
right,
forever.
right.
The post 90s generation in China, which is sort of the millennial equivalent, is turning 30. And in Chinese, there's the saying, 三十而立. It's a Confucian saying. It more or less means when you're 30, you should really get your stuff together.
Right.
And so we were supposed to be filming that. And of course, everything happened in Wuhan. I stayed in the United States to make sure I could be close to family if anything happened. And now I can't go back if I wanted to. So this is in
Right.
my apartment, but I'm trying to make it mine for the time being.
Right. So it's been a long time that you've been in China. I didn't realize you were still living there. How long was it? And if you want to tell us a little bit about those early days when you moved there.
Yeah, so I first, it's been 10 years of me going to China now, which is wild. I first went to China as a 20-year-old. So I'm from California, went to school in New York, I went to Columbia, and I actually took one semester of Chinese and hated it. And it is to this day the worst grade I've ever got in my life. I dropped it, I cursed it, I never wanted to touch it again. But because of that one semester, when I was deciding where to study abroad, I was looking at France because I spoke French. Um, and then I saw the pamphlets for Hong Kong. Um,
Mm.
and the pamphlets for France look a lot like a history book. I'm a big science fiction fan, and the cover of the Hong Kong pamphlet looked a lot like the science fiction books I like to read. So this idea that I could either go study the past or go study the future, uh, it was sort of an easy decision. I
Yeah.
went and then got really, I just loved it. I had never been to Asia before, so I traveled a lot to Shenzhen in mainland China and realized very quickly that the China that gets described to us in the media and even bouncing off of sort of executives who go spend a week in Shanghai and come back as China experts, that China is much different than the China on the ground. I
Right.
went back to New York and realized that, I was waking up every day and feeling bored in New York. So when you
Yeah.
feel bored in New York, that's when you know you got to go do something else. And China called to me. I thought I'd be there for a year. I didn't speak any Chinese. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have a job when I went there. Um, After about 2 years, I passed the highest level of fluency you could test for. I was pretty adamant about that. And then another 2 years later, mostly living really on the ground in China, doing interviews throughout smaller cities in China, a lot of secondary research. The book Young China: How the Restless Generation Will Change Their Country and the World came out, and that's how we met, Valentina. We
Yeah.
through that book, I was invited to speak. I've gotten to speak on 5 continents in the last year or two, which is pretty cool. Um,
Yeah.
but more than anything, right now, I think what we're seeing is a transition. And that
Mhm.
transition is recognizing that, sure, China isn't perfect and a lot of us don't like the government. That's fine. But the people in the government are different. So
Mhm.
recognizing that what the people are going through there, particularly in for this conversation today, the startup community, the small business community, um, they kind of got hit first. And because of China's culture to begin with, of rapid change and rapid adaptation, I actually think that China is, and these young people specifically, are in a lot of ways better poised to imagine solutions
Mhm.
to crisis management. You can even say that the last 30 years of Chinese history have just been perpetual crisis management. Uh, and so
Right.
trying to figure out how to work around that, I think today, and for your community in particular, there's a lot that we can hopefully learn from our friends and folks who came before us in in China. We're getting a what's up from Mai. What's up, Mai? Big shout
Right.
out to the World Youth Forum team and Egypt. Maybe y'all who are thinking about a great thing to take part in, you can once we are allowed to be close to one another again, you can
Yeah.
apply. I'm sure the World Youth Forum is going to do some really innovative online content going forward. Plug for them.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But you were just starting to tell us about what you discovered in Chinese millennials, right? What first, and the impact this dramatic growth is having on the entire world.
Sure. So the big idea here that we have to wrap our minds around is that for the first time in history, at least modern history, the last 300, 400 years, but really since World War II, there's the opportunity for an Asian culture to be driving global trends,
Right.
politics, uh, legal systems, trade, uh, fashion, ideas of, and then like the softer stuff, like what does it mean to be masculine? What does it mean to be feminine? How are businesses done? What does investment look like? How does technological upgrading take place? For the last 70 years, but you could argue since the age of exploration, the 1500s, 1600s, it's been the West kind of dominating things. I think of it as cultural gravity. So
Mm-hmm.
there are 417 million millennials in China. Just so
Right.
you could wrap your mind around that, there's 80 million in the United States. There's
Right.
actually more young people in China than there are young people in Europe, the Middle East, and North America combined.
Oh my God.
So when you take that and then you add the incredible increase in wealth that's happened in my lifetime in the last 30 years, in China specifically, you take the rise in global significance.
Mm-hmm.
A good way to measure that, by the way, in 2003, when the
Mm-hmm.
SARS epidemic was happening,
Yeah.
China was about 3 to 4% of global GDP. Just what, 17 years later, as this crisis is taking place, China's now 20% of global GDP.
Right.
So 3% to 20, I'm reversing here. There we go. 3% to 20% in 17 years. So when you
Right.
just think about the significance, when
Yeah.
you just think about the impact, not just, okay, China's far away, maybe there's something we can learn from them. It's no, anything that happens from China, good or bad. We talked a lot about the good for the last bunch of years when the
Mm-hmm.
economy was going well, but
Yeah.
now we're also seeing that some of the bad, or more of a mix, it's going to impact us everywhere, and that doesn't change. The fact that a virus that comes from a wet market in Wuhan can be impacting our friends in Cairo, can be
Yeah.
impacting Rome, can be
Yeah.
impacting New York. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a new fact of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Now, in this context, you have seen and you have witnessed lots of startups and lots of entrepreneurs and a dramatic change. I mean, I saw the anecdote that you were making about the a beggar that had inserted a QR code right in the street.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
um, tell us a little bit. What's the ecosystem in China like? What's the startup ecosystem like?
So the startup ecosystem in China, I think, is really unique. I'm actually working on a piece right now that I've been working on for a while, but I still think it's like the best. It's with Harvard Business Review. It's supposed to be. I've been delaying it, so now hopefully I'll have a lot of time to work on it. The basic idea, though, is that the defining characteristic, not something that's happened, but the defining single defining characteristic of what makes young people in China unique versus young people around the world is
Hmm.
that their world, their ecosystem, what's around them has changed faster 10x than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was saying this before, but in my lifetime, I watched our per capita GDP in the United States increase 2.5 times. So that
Hmm.
means, I mean, if you could, I want you to imagine that physically. That means the schools my parents could send me to,
Hmm.
maybe 2.5 times better. The cars that my neighbor could drive, maybe 2.5 times faster. The trips we could take as a family, maybe 2.5 times nicer, 2.5 times longer. Like there's physical changes here. My friends in China, in that same period of time, have witnessed 30x growth in per capita GDP.
Right.
So about 10 times what we've witnessed.
Right.
And if you're wondering if it's just a developing country thing, it's not. India, massive millennial population. They've witnessed 6x per capita GDP growth in their lifetime. So 30 to 6, so 5x in China, what you have in India. So the point isn't that China's grown really fast. The point is that for young people all over the country, the only thing they've known their entire life is rapid change. And so when you think about what that does to an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
when you think about what that does to the way you expect your product, the way that you interact with money, the way you interact with your town. Remember, most of these people have watched their village turn into a town and turn into a city
Yeah.
in their lifetime. And
Yeah.
that's just normal. And so, the picture I showed, it's about how adaptation and adaptability is the rule of law in China. And I could tell that story if that, maybe that could kick us off for fun stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so backdrop, there's a saying in China, 摸着石头过河. It means crossing the river by feeling the stones. It's a beautiful way of saying we don't really know exactly what we're doing, right? Like there's this rushing river and you can't see the bottom, but you're literally feeling the stones on the riverbed with the bottom of your feet. You're expecting to slip. And that attitude has washed over the entire country. So the picture I show is of a beggar, this is before COVID-19, with a QR code on his chest. He printed it out and he hung it around his chest. Now, the thing is, in the begging community, your industry relied on loose change, right? People would come out of the subway, pull
Yeah.
out their pocket, and put change into your cup. The
Yeah.
problem is around 2015 in China, people stopped carrying money.
At all.
Mobile payment. Everyone just had their phones. It was WeChat Pay. It was Alipay.
Right.
27% of Apple users in the United States use mobile payment. 27%. 97% of smartphone users in China are using mobile payment. So overnight, you had this massive shift. Talk about a disruption. If your industry relies on money, and people stop carrying it, what do? So Lao Wang, the beggar in this picture, described to me how, well, he bought the cheapest smartphone he could, which was $90. He printed out a QR code, which is the thing that you scan.
Yeah.
And now when people are coming out of the subway, instead of putting money in their cup, taking out their phone, scanning his QR code and donating that way. Right. And by the way, we talk about technological upgrading, which everyone should be considering right now, in terms of, okay, how do I merge the online offline world? His revenue went up 3x. So like there's, disruption can be a disaster, but if you're willing to adapt, it can be an incredible opportunity.
Right. You were talking as well recently about WeChat and how it adapts basically to every other, it replaces every other platform, right? Even payments, you were saying. What other apps or what other startups have grown and are very, very popular that you can show us a little bit? So to understand what the innovation landscape looks like.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we're talking about COVID in particular, because it's one thing to be like, okay, what apps have done well. I've since we talked, Valentina, I've reached out. I know a good amount of people in the startup community in China, mostly Chinese founders, and I reached out to a bunch of them, and I wanted to talk about some of those cases as sort of case studies. I've never talked about this with anyone. This is actually an interesting new area for me, so we can try it out with your community. One of them is in the travel community. And so you can imagine that if you have a travel startup in a time when there's travel bans, where everyone's afraid of getting near another person, where people are associating cruises or planes with death, kind of hard to raise another round of money. Kind of hard to keep your cash flow going. So there's this one great company called the English name is Unique Way. And what Unique Way has done really well, and what they did before, was that they realized that everyone likes tailored trips. That there was sort of a rising middle class in China around our age who wasn't rich, but still didn't want to go on those big group trips where you just get on the bus, get off the bus, take a picture, or get on the bus, go to sleep, get off the bus, take a picture. Like that. People don't want that anymore. So they integrated basically the sort of personalized travel advisor experience, and they created a very intelligent, like actually quite good set of algorithms through an app that, based on your travel preferences, would help tailor an itinerary just for you and your partner or your friends. But still, so they had an online offline component that was very well integrated. And when you traveled, you could dive. They had sort of tourism. They had suggestions throughout. Your entire itinerary was on your phone. It was live. You could interact with it. It was incredible. But people aren't leaving the country still. So
Right.
what they've done in the last 2 months, they used to only be international. Now they're only domestic. So
Right.
so every single product that they have developed, every single one, they put
Right.
on the shelf.
Right.
Because in their minds, they're not an international travel company. They've realized that the core of what they do is to help people have these unique ways, these unique journeys, these unique trips. And so it doesn't have to be international to be unique. People
Right.
are still willing to travel within China now. So they've
Right.
shifted entirely to the domestic market. They've looked into new tourism destinations that are just opening up. They've started working with them, encouraging them to be able to greet this new style of customer. And it basically shifted lanes completely from their old product to a new product.
Right.
And for us, this makes sense. All right, the core of their business is travel. It's making beautiful, it's making your and my, we have 2 weeks a year. How do we pack those with incredible memories? But for them, they literally had to scrap every single product that they had worked on specifically.
Yeah.
And so when I was talking to the founder last night, sort of getting ready for this, she was like, look, you have two choices when you're facing a crisis. Either one is you could mourn the loss of your favorite thing. I've been working on my favorite thing for the last 2 years. It's this great product. It works exactly like this. It works perfectly for this situation. The problem is that situation, in this case, international travel, doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And so in China, you're used to needing to survive and adapt with the fast moving pace. So she's like, yeah, we mourned for a little bit and we still mourn, but we spend another half of our time figuring out how to survive.
Right.
And the way we figure out how to survive is we adapt.
Right. Right. So in what time span do they do all those changes? Because I mean,
2
we're
months.
talking, right.
2 months.
Right.
What I've been talking to a lot of people about this, and I think there's a parable that somebody told me the other day about koalas. Koala bears, like the cute little in Australia. So I was talking with someone who was on crisis relief in Australia back when these bushfires was the biggest news in the world. And he was saying that koalas eat eucalyptus, and they only grow in specific regions. So koalas, when you rescue them, you have to put them back in the exact same place that they're from. Otherwise, they'll starve because it's not like they can't eat other types of leaves. They just don't like to. And so instead of eating the other types of leaves, they'll die.
Right.
What's the lesson here? Don't be a koala. Like the goal is not to just eat your favorite thing. The goal is to figure out, okay, how do I survive? How do I have to adapt? And then, all right, maybe trying a different type of product might actually be even better, might give me more nourishment, might create a new cash flow than I had imagined ever in the past. Education is another good example.
Right. What's been happening in the educational field? That's another question I had actually. Like, are there industries that you notice are, kind of getting up pretty fast or
Yeah. So there's a few that have just been rocked, right? Like education, it's hard to teach a class like if you can't be in the class. And a lot of teachers, it's like Google Hangouts isn't made to be engaging, so it's just a worse product.
Right.
A lot of stuff goes online because online can make it better, but in this case, it's just a worse product. Valentina, are you still with me?
I lost you for a second.
Are you still with me?
Yes, now I am. I think, sorry, I lost you for a second.
No worries. So the trick is figuring out how to bring your services online without getting worse. So in China, there's two really good examples that I want to talk about. One of them is obviously education, and the other one is concerts and DJs. So I'll do DJs first just because it's a fun one. Like the thing about how DJ and like how clubs. Are you still with me, Valentina?
We got cut off again.
Okay.
Yes, it happens with the lines these days and the overconsumption. So DJs.
Yeah, no worries. So DJs, I mean, when you think of DJs, what do you think of? You think of like dark rooms, you think of alcohol, you think of maybe, I don't know. But I mean, like that's how clubs make money. Like if you're a club, yeah, you make money off the DJ, but you pay for door admission, you pay
Mm-hmm.
for the bar,
Mm-hmm.
you pay for snacks, like you
Mm-hmm.
pay for the experience around the DJ. And if you're a DJ, your entire job is getting people in a closed, condensed space jumping, right? Like that's like just for hours.
Yeah.
It's really, really, really hard to do that when people can't gather in closed
Yeah.
spaces.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just done.
Yeah.
And so there's a great example of this online offline mix. It started with a guy named DJ Tax, this Chinese DJ who was invited by a club to do. Everyone knows TikTok at this point.
Yeah.
So TikTok's a Chinese company, and as you can imagine, when everyone's at home, they're glued to their phones. So they broadcasted and advertised for a live TikTok rave. And so DJ Tax is on his phone and he links it up and he starts spinning tracks. And over 1 million people tune in.
Oh, wow.
The thing about 1 million people tuning in is I don't know if you've ever been to any club that can fit 1 million people. You
Yeah.
can't. It's
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah.
So if DJ Tax thinks about what he does is he creates incredible experiences for people that put them into a happy, positive, excited, vibey place.
Mm-hmm.
And they found a way to do that online. Is it perfect? It's not. But
Right.
can they reach more people?
Yeah.
He was actually able to generate each time that they were doing this, they were generating 2 million renminbi. So about a little bit around 360,000 US dollars just in people paying really tiny admissions. Um,
Right.
just trying to support. They're like, look, we recognize that you guys are in a tough space. This is an online product now. And in the same way I'll pay for my Spotify or whatever, uh, I'll also pay for DJ Tax to rip up my living room with hot beats.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so
That's
finding a
incredible.
way for your core, I mean, instead of thinking of what you do as being like, oh, I make music for people in clubs to listen to, just stop it. I make music. And okay, if I make music for people to listen to, how do I adapt that for the online world? I mean, they're talking about these were called cloud DJs in China, or
Mhm.
cloud
Cloud
raves.
DJs. Uh-huh.
And so you just got to figure out instead of how do I make a worse product online, like how do I make
Mm-hmm.
a bad imitation of my normal product?
Yeah.
The people who I found in China who are being successful, and this one teacher in particular, who I'll talk about in a second, what he told me was the key is to make a, a better product that's
Mm-hmm.
suited for the platform rather
Mm-hmm.
than just pretending like you're doing what you used to do and having it be worse because it's online.
Right.
So what's the core of what you do? And then how could technology make it better instead of how is it inevitably going to make it less personal, less human?
Right. Right. Now you were talking, you were saying just now, you were talking last night to several entrepreneurs, right? How did the crisis and the COVID hit them? Was it unexpected to them? How did they adapt? You talk a lot about the adaptation of Chinese youngsters and millennials. Um, how did they experience that? Because that not many people talk about that these days.
It hit them brutally hard. So I would say harder than, I mean, definitely harder than anywhere else in the world.
Mm,
Um, they didn't know about it.
mm,
Everyone in the country was traveling because it was Chinese New Year.
yeah.
Uh, and so Chinese New Year is like Christmas or whatever your big holiday is, where everyone goes home,
Yeah.
and they go home to be with family.
Yeah.
That was happening. And so in China, there's actually 3 billion train tickets that are bought for this period of time, one way. So people are, I mean, it's just a massive movement of people, which is about the worst time to have
Yeah.
a virus
Yeah.
spread.
Yeah.
And so people weren't just locked up, they were locked up with their parents.
Yeah.
They were locked up with their in-laws. They were locked up with their siblings if they had any. Like I have a friend in Wuhan
Yeah.
who just got out of 60 days with her parents.
Right.
And she's been living on her own for the last 6 years. So um, the psychological cost of quarantine, uh,
Mm.
and keep in mind also that at that point, COVID-19, people didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
They didn't like we know so much more about it now. Obviously, it's really bad,
Yeah.
but there's knowing kind of what it is,
Yeah.
it allows you to be like, all right, if I do X, Y, and Z, I'll survive. In
Yeah.
Wuhan, again, where I was supposed to go, there was so much unknown that the level of paranoia was so high.
Right.
Um, you know, I'll be honest with you, a lot of small businesses evaporated.
Mm.
A lot of industries did not figure out how to adapt.
Yeah.
But one of the, and I know some of these companies that just went under, and what they said to me was like, look, we if we had been prepared, not for this crisis, but if we had just read the writing on the wall and
Mm.
integrated our services into having some online component,
Mm.
there's so much talk about like passive income in the startup community.
Yeah.
There's so much talk about, okay, how do you turn your service into a product?
Yeah.
And the most successful companies that we've seen right now have figured out a way for their services to not lose power by being integrated into the cloud and being integrated as an online service.
Right.
And that includes communication with customers, that can include communication with clients. My friend who runs, I have a guy named Malik who runs Lime Education. You've never heard of it. The
No.
reason I think it's a good example of you've never heard of it, they just sold for a big number in the last week. And
Right.
I mean, think about being bought, think about being acquired during COVID-19.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did he do that?
Yeah.
So in the
How?
last 4
I
years, Malik was at the head of the. Malik, by the way, is like 3 years younger than me. He's from Xinjiang, so he's born in China. Speaks excellent English, excellent Chinese. He's very cool, and he invested early on in live streaming and TikTok, so Douyin in China, and basically he was making funny videos. And then people realized that his English was really good. He was studying abroad at Columbia. They're like, oh man, you should like teach us some English along the way. And so he was making funny videos, and then he was also making English videos. And then suddenly he was mostly just making English videos because he realized he could make money doing that. And then he created an online English company whose job was to make English entertaining for adults. So like English classes are boring, language classes are boring.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
learning about pop culture and learning from KOLs, so key opinion leaders, sort of like the online Instagram star equivalent in China, suddenly like that is a more interesting education model. So they have over 3 million followers. He personally has over 3 million followers across different platforms. His education platform has even more. And what he started doing, which has allowed them to be really excellent during the coronavirus, was okay, education as an industry is in crisis. How can we take what we've learned about putting education online and teach educators around the country? Right. And so before they were just B2C, right? They were just working with their customers, and that's hard. Yeah. But suddenly they knew how to not just bring education online, but bring education online and make it better.
There's a little cut, I think. Yes.
Okay. Are you with me now?
Yes.
So what I was saying was what Malik did really well during this period of time was he helped companies around the country not just bring education online, but bring it online and then make it better. Make it better than being in the classroom, make it more engaging, more effective. And so before they were B2C exclusively, now they're a B2B model. I mean, he pivoted in 6 weeks. And began teaching all of these companies around the country. He was teaching them, but of course they couldn't learn it in time. So then he started running their online. All right, this is how you do it. We can edit this video for you. We could get like he created a suite of services, and that suite of services was so compelling that one of his biggest clients, who's one of the massive education players in China, were just like, hey, we're just going to buy you.
Right.
And so figuring out how to adapt and be like, I'm not just an education company. I've understood the essence of communicating information powerfully, persuasively, in an engaging, fun way. And suddenly that's a product that not just consumers need, but businesses all over the country need.
Right. And this happened in the middle of the crisis, right? So that's also, it kind of shows you how adaptable the community is.
One of the most, I really do think that this is one of the most important things when you're imagining this. And by the way, so my business, I run an organization called Young China Group. My biggest clients are travel, and I speak at a lot of conferences, which you can't do anymore. So
Right.
in the last couple of weeks, my business has been totally rocked, like
Right. Right.
honestly.
Yeah.
But so I've been going through this exercise myself, and it's been effective. Like when what my Chinese entrepreneur friends who have been successful have told me to do is like, all right, spend 50% of your time, divide your time.
Mm.
Because right now we're spending all of our time freaking out,
Yeah.
right? We're all of our time survival. And
Yeah.
that's, you're either going to be really excited all the time or you're going to be really depressed all the time.
Yeah.
What was recommended to me was basically have 3 different slots of time.
Yeah.
So spend 50% of your time survival. Make sure your cash flow is right. Make sure your expenses are controlled. Make sure you're going to be able to last for the next couple of months. But only
Mm-hmm.
spend 50% of your time doing that because a lot of people are spending 100%. So
Right.
50% of your time on basically freaking out and adapting. Spend another 30% of your time on thinking, okay, how can I approach this from a different angle? Like, what are the opportunities amidst the crisis?
Yeah.
Maybe I could take, maybe there is an opportunity that after we've survived, maybe there's an opportunity to actually thrive during this period of time. And really spend 30% of your time thinking about that. And then 20% of your time, your business time. So theoretically, you should sleep, but um, spend another 20% of your time imagining what is your business going to look like after the crisis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because there's been a way that business has been run, I mean, for a decade, really. Like when the economy is good, people aren't making radical changes.
Mm-hmm.
But we've had a radical change made to us. And so thinking, okay, in a post COVID-19 world, if I've survived and survive, and even if you don't survive, by the way, I know a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs be like, look, we got decimated, but we're going to come back and make something else that's suited
Yeah.
to the future. Think about what your future business looks like. So 50% survival, do it, eat, feed your family, feed yourself, pay rent. 30% thinking about, okay, what are these sort of opportunities? How am I not thinking about this in a way that could be more creative
Mm-hmm.
or adaptable?
Mm-hmm.
And then 20%,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what should my business look like after this? Because it's probably not the same as what I've been doing. Remember those
Yeah.
koalas? If you
Yeah.
just only want to eat that one leaf that has
Yeah.
worked for the last 10 years, you might not survive. It's much better to think about what's the core of who I am, what's the core of who my business is, and then
Yeah.
how might I pursue other avenues and keep that core intact.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Do you have a particular vision on what things are going to look like in China? Or, I mean, I understand that some areas in China are already out of the quarantine. Is that right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
China's back to work. Um,
Right.
but
So
people are still,
how did they get, yeah.
sorry,
How did they get back up on their feet? What happened after COVID,
it's
right?
still it's still happening. So
Hmm.
everyone had to do was they immediately had to figure out how to work online. This is just
Yeah.
everyone had to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
How do I run meetings online? How do I make sure that my employees are doing it? What do I do if they don't have desks? And some people did this in a really bad way. Like some people would make their employees take pictures of themselves at their desks. And like
Oh,
there's got to be hopefully you've built a good culture beforehand. But if
yeah.
not, now's a good time to build a good culture.
Yeah.
Um, but they're recognizing that even though people are back at work, people are still afraid. People
Hmm.
still aren't traveling abroad. People still
Hmm.
aren't gathering at crowded restaurants. People still aren't going to classrooms in the way that they were. I mean, industry has not fully recovered. And
Yeah.
so, look, the the online offline integration and figuring out how to use particularly mobile services. I mean, in a lot of the part of the world where where we'll be talking to right now, like I think China is really well positioned to actually lead the rest of the world,
Hmm.
especially countries that are more mobile on their phones instead of on computers, because there's ways for technologies to bring people closer. Teaching, there's ways for you to get one-on-one attention from your teacher that you could never
Hmm.
dream of getting in a classroom.
Right.
Honestly,
Right. Yeah.
there's ways of engaging with movies and video, and I mean, there's ways that could actually be more human, better, more effective. Um, the trick is figuring out how to figuring out how to enjoy that, because that to me doesn't go away. The online offline doesn't. I don't think conferences for me are going to happen the same way. I know a lot of people who only do conference speaking, and like, talk about koala only liking one kind of leaf. Like, I don't know that tree is still going to be feeding people
Yeah.
10 years from now, 3 years from now, 2 years, like, who knows? So
Yeah.
but if your goal is to bring content to people and change the way they think about things, and change the way companies think about things, okay, there's a lot of other platforms and mechanisms to do that.
Right, right. Going back to the value that you're providing, right? The value that you provide with the conference, as you said, is not the conference itself, is the value that you're giving in the content, right? And this content can take different packaging, different forms, different shapes, right? So yeah, I fully agree. What else can you tell us about your conversations with the entrepreneurs over there in China? What are they looking for now?
You know, I will say one of the major differences I've noticed is, I'm in a, it might just be the group. I'm from the San Francisco area, so I know a lot of the entrepreneur people. I know a lot of that tech crowd, and
Yeah.
most of the stuff I'm reading that people are writing about, like, here's how to keep your business going. People write a lot about mental health here, and like how to feel good, and like, take care of your kids, which is awesome. I'm like, I don't want to disparage that. Nobody's talking about that in China. Like,
Right.
it's important. Like, there are some conversations, but here that's the main conversation. It feels like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
at least a main conversation. What people in China are
Mm-hmm.
talking about, like, look, we've got to bust our butts, and we've got to figure out how to survive this.
Yeah.
This isn't about being comfortable. We've been uncomfortable. In
Yeah.
China, they talk about a Jojo Liu 996 work schedule. I don't know if you've heard about this.
No, no.
So
What is
this is
that?
startup work schedule in China. It's from 9 in the morning to 9 at night, 6 days a week.
Oh,
So, like,
okay. That's intense.
China, like, a lot of these startups are just cutthroat. And so
Yeah.
this idea that suddenly it's more competitive or things are more difficult, in a
Yeah.
way, Chinese companies are thrive in that. And they're
Mhm.
also used to losing.
Yeah.
I think this is important. Like, if you've only experienced success, I was talking to the travel community. I told you I do a good amount of work there.
Mhm.
And a lot of
Mhm.
the young people I talk to, they've only been in the business in good economies. And in a good economy, the travel business thrives. The
Mhm.
restaurant business thrives. People are eating out. A lot of these services that are seen as extras, they do well because people have those luxuries. And if you've only had to sell in a good economy, or if you've only had to seek investment when times were fat,
Mhm.
um, it's going to be hard for you now. You'll have to learn how to deal with setbacks. In
Yeah.
China, because things are changing so fast and because the competition is so cutthroat, most people there are used to being rejected 9 times before they get their 10th opportunity, or 20
Mhm.
times, or 30
Mhm.
times. There's a
Mhm.
boxer that says, learn how to love the hit. Like, if you're a boxer and you're trying to not get punched in the face, like, that's a hard that's
Yeah.
hard business. Like, you're in the business of not getting punched in the face, but punching people in the face, or learning how to do both at the same time. So if
Yeah.
you can learn how to love the hit, then suddenly your job can be a lot more fun. So
Yeah.
recognize that this is a hit. This is going
Yeah.
to make you stronger.
Yeah.
And the people who can figure out how to love the hit and fight through that,
Yeah.
um, I mean, that's a good. To me, that's what a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs have that I just don't always see here. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, I will say also, um, one I have a really good friend who runs a company called N Plus Digital. 数字营销. It's a Chinese company. He's a Chinese friend. I've, like, met his kid. He's like, it's someone I've become very close with. We were both speaking at an Alibaba cloud conference about the
Mhm.
future, about 2050. By the way, a lot of those
Mhm.
predictions are now wrong because of this.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
but what he's been writing a lot about how to survive during this crisis in China, in
Mhm.
Chinese. And one of the things that he was describing to me was that, there's a certain type of leader right now, and not just a certain type of leader, but a certain type of coworker, a certain type
Mhm.
of boss, a certain type of manager,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
who, when times were good, was nice, because it's easy to be nice when times are good. Um,
Yeah.
you can tell a lot more about a person by the character with which they hold themselves during crisis. And
Yeah.
so you can be a good leader during the best economy. That's great. Um, if you can be a poised, kind, assertive, calm, forward-thinking leader during times of crisis, that's an
Mm-hmm.
entirely different thing. And so 10
Right.
years from now, we'll all be looking back at this time and thinking about, how did we handle ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
Did I panic when
Mm-hmm.
things went wrong? Did I lash out
Yeah.
at my co-founders? Did I get angry at my customers for not wanting to buy our stuff now when the customers were hurting? Did I provide services for free? Did I create online content that people would just want to have, instead of demanding that everyone pay me for stuff all the time? Did I did I cut out a client who couldn't pay me suddenly, or did I help them navigate through this time?
Mm.
There's a way that you can
Mm-hmm.
act during a moment of survival. And what this friend has told me is that everyone in China remembers how you acted when it was bad. Even just 2 months later, everyone there remembers what
Mm.
clients were nice and which
Mm.
ones were assholes, who was calm and who was losing. And so the way that we act now could be defining of our reputation, uh, for the
Right.
next 10
Right.
years.
Right. Right.
So
This
smile.
is super important mindset lesson. Sorry?
So smile more, right? Like,
Yeah.
find a way to
Yeah.
make other people feel good as you're going
Yeah.
through the bad, and
Yeah.
supported and encouraged. And, you don't have to lie to people. This isn't going to
Yeah.
be the time. Some people might do great right now, but
Yeah.
the likelihood that this is your moment to become a billionaire, but you can still be supportive, encouraging, and, remember that people feed off your energy. Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if we both have guitars and I strum an A chord, the A chord, I don't play music, so forgive me. And I strum a certain chord, and the chord on your guitar, without anybody touching it, will vibrate.
Mm-hmm.
And human beings are that way too. Like, if I'm freaked out, you're going to tune to my energy. You're going to feel my energy, and that's going to change the way you see things. So when you're dealing with clients, especially, or you're dealing with investors, or you're dealing with your own team, remember that people feel what you feel, and it changes how they act. And so being a calm, composed leader right now, I think, is more important than
Right, right. Super interesting lesson, particularly because it comes from a place where we, out of prejudice, we think because they're so hardworking and they're so, as you were saying, right, 996, they're so strict with their working schedule and self-demanding. You would think that that's not, the kind of mindset that you would find there. What other things did you learn from that kind of mindset, or take from that mindset in 10 years? I mean,
Yeah. There's a few things. I will say, um, there's something that's going on in China right now that I don't know. I found a lot of people when I was in Egypt. I felt a lot of the same energy. One of the
mhm,
really wonderful things about my job is I get to travel and get to meet a lot of people and hear what they think.
yeah,
And there is a sense now, that the way China was treated, uh, not the China, like the Chinese, everyone needs to be able to separate the Chinese government from the Chinese people,
yeah,
right? Like, when we talk about China, we talk about the Chinese government and the Chinese people. The thing about the Chinese people is they didn't vote in the Chinese government.
yeah.
So, like, Americans, you could blame us for our government.
Yeah.
Like, you could totally do that. Why? Because we voted for. Like, I didn't, but we did. And so we have a system that allows you to vote for somebody, and then that person gets put in power. And so, like, blame us for that.
Mm, mm,
No one in China voted for their government. Um,
right.
they just didn't have that choice. And by
Yeah.
the way, a lot of people would. But the point is, when we only focus on the government, there's a lot of people in China who are looking at the outpouring of love that Italians are getting, who are looking at the support that doctors are getting around the world now that the crisis is impacting others. And they're looking at themselves and being like, where was our love? Where
Mm-hmm.
was our support?
Mm-hmm.
There was a Chengyu, there was a Chinese idiom that I saw on all over the web when this was going on really intensely in China, and that was 落井下石. It means to throw rocks at the man who has fallen in the well. There was a sense in China that only focusing on the worst of the government, only focusing on the immediate
Yeah.
mishandling, gross
Yeah.
mishandling. By the way, everyone in China, I've never seen people in China more pissed off towards their government in the last decade. Not there's nothing that's created more tension. But once the government pivoted, there's a lot of people in China who feel like they've done the best job in the world at
Mm-hmm.
combating the crisis. They've been
Mm-hmm.
assertive. They've been effective. Um, their companies have rebounded. When we're talking about, how do we get economies back on track? China's economy is in a lot of trouble, but
Mm.
people are back at their jobs now. And
Right.
so a lot of my friends in China mostly just feel like when I ask them about this, like I'm known to, I'm clearly friendly with a lot of Chinese people. Um, but they're like, yeah, man, like I just like we want to help. Like I wish
Mm.
we've gone through this. I'd love to figure out how to communicate this more. So I have to thank you, Valentina, because I am now going to write more about this. Like I think there are a lot of lessons we can learn from China, particularly about how do you integrate your services into being online in a way that actually adds more value rather than detracts. And then thinking about this adaptive mindset thing, like there really is a lot we can learn from the people who went through it first.
Right. Right.
But
Well,
that's it
thank
for me.
you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, it's
Um,
totally my pleasure.
I have one last question. I mean, by the way, if people who are watching, guys, if you have questions, please type them on the comments. Zach is going to be replying them. But I have a burning question because I was, as I said at the beginning, right? I was very puzzled to understand the impact and the growth of China and how this is really going to dramatically change the world from the travel industry, as you were saying, to very, very different industries. I mean, we're seeing what's happening with Chinese loans in Africa and in other regions. Do you think this crisis changes things? And if so, how?
I think this crisis does change things, and I actually
Mm,
think it accelerates the change I was talking about.
mm,
Honestly, so
mhm,
I've clearly stated that I'm an American now. I'm a
mhm.
proud American. I'm not one. I'm not like I think there are a lot of flaws in China. I think there are clearly a lot of flaws in America, but like I'm not someone who dislikes where he's from. I'm really not. But uh, what I said, how you could learn a lot about a, a leader from their response to crisis in a company. You can learn a lot about a country by the way they respond to crisis.
Mhm,
And I've had dozens and dozens and dozens of Chinese friends in the United States who are studying abroad go home. In the last couple of weeks, they went back to China. Why? Because
right.
they feel like it's safer. Um, leadership in France has talked about where has aid come from at this period of time. It's come from China. Um, I don't think China wants to be a leader in the same way that America has tried to be a leader. Like
Yeah.
America gets applauded, but it also gets criticized. But
Yeah.
America tries to be very hands-on, good, bad, like it just does.
Yeah.
But we've also, we've been responsible for a lot of global aid. Um, we're seeing that for the first time ever, this has brought forward a side of China that is sort of the adult in the room. Like, as people are deciding, do they close parks? The state of Florida is like, we're going to keep beaches open. Uh, the UK is talking about herd immunity. Like,
Yeah.
it's insane. Just because people don't want to sacrifice their economies a little bit,
Yeah.
they're willing to sacrifice their people. And so
Yeah.
people in China are like,
Mm,
thank goodness we didn't do that. But for the first time ever that I've dealt with China and China and the world, I think of what I do as bridging. For the first time ever, there have been people around the world um, who are willing to entertain that maybe not everything about China is bad. Um,
mm.
this
Yeah.
is the first time, honestly. Like most people, when they think of China, they think of a kind of bad government, and then a toy that will maybe break in their kid's mouth or something. Like that's the
Yeah,
association.
toys. Yeah.
But there's this idea that now China, even though it gets stuff wrong, like totally gets things wrong, but its response when it gets things wrong can be composed,
Mm-hmm.
coordinated, and
Mm-hmm.
powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a type of global soft power, like in the same way that you'd want that as a leader in your company or as a
Mm-hmm.
contractor that you work with,
Mm-hmm.
having that as a partner in globalization,
Mm-hmm.
having that as a type of economy or government that you can aspire to. Um, I think you're going to see good and bad to it, because now it's going to be an excuse for a lot of countries around the world and a lot of leaders who like to keep a tighter grip to copy that style of governance and be like, look, it worked in China, it's going to work for you. But I think there are also aspects of that that hopefully are going to make people who haven't changed, like, to realize that, okay, maybe there's something worth investigating here. Maybe there's a way that we could adapt to be better suited um, to a crisis
Yeah.
in some of the ways that China was, not all of the ways, but some of the ways.
Yeah.
Um, and so that perspective, um, not just in terms of global supply chain, not in terms of the global consumer, those two things are going to radically change everything in the world. The way that clothing is designed, the way that cruise ships are designed, the way that tourist destinations, who they're designed for, ideas of global masculinity, what it means to be feminine, beauty standards. Those could all like this. The consumer clout of China, as it's rising right now, means that all of the global, if you're making something for your customer is changing.
Yeah.
Really, that's what.
Yeah.
But also this idea that it's questioning the way we think of governance.
Mm-hmm.
I think this has accelerated that process.
Yeah. 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 We have a couple of questions. So Nadim is saying, Zach, you mentioned Egypt and something in common with China. Can you elaborate
Yeah,
just a little bit? So I think we're, yeah, trying to find commonalities in
yeah. So they're both places I love. I think starting there.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel very grateful to have gotten to meet a lot of Egyptian entrepreneurs over the last year or two, and I think there's two ways that they're similar. The first way, in terms of business, there's I've done some work with Google's Next Billion Users team.
Mm-hmm.
The Next Billion Users team at Google, their whole job is to look at the next billion people who are getting online and who could be users of their products, basically. Um, and there's a lot of talk about proximity.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people, as they're getting online now, they're not using their computers, they're using phones. And there's a lot of talk about how the United States isn't using mobile payment because we're still used to using computers, like people from the 90s. Um, but people in China, it's just intuitive. Everything's intuitive to be totally mobile. Um, Egypt and China are similar in that what Chinese entrepreneurs are creating there, I think would apply to a huge swath of this next billion people who are getting online. So
Yeah.
users in India are likely to use their mobile devices or use apps, or like the use case for certain products are similar in China as they would be in Egypt. So the opportunity for Egyptian entrepreneurs is to create something that could be used throughout all of China, throughout all of Egypt, throughout all of North Africa, throughout all of the Middle East, because they're all using their products in the same way. Versus in America, it's difficult for us to look at Egyptian users, customers, people, and imagine what they need. And
Right.
so Egypt, it has a really strong entrepreneurial mentality. As people there are imagining opportunities, the opportunities that are close to home for them are going to be closer to a lot of people's homes around the region, but also throughout Asia. And these are some of
Mm.
the most exciting, bubbling opportunities in the world right now.
Yeah, definitely.
The second part
Yeah.
is that Egypt is misunderstood. So I actually
Mm-hmm.
feel like this was very similar to what a lot of my friends complain about in China. And
Mm-hmm.
after 2011, where Egypt was in the news every day, once things started to get better, the reporters left.
Yeah.
Like when I told people I was going to Egypt, that like the last time they had heard about Egypt was, you know, during the revolution. And so what we know about Egypt isn't up to date. And so there's this side of Egypt that is entrepreneurial, that is thriving, that is exciting, that is being revitalized right now, that no one talks about because we only write about bad things.
Yeah.
And so China, my friends in China feel the same way. They're like, there's this amazing side of what we're doing, but we only focus, but your reporters only focus on the negative. And when something is good happening, you guys are gone. And so I found a lot of Egyptians in the way that they felt like they were understood internationally. It mirrored my friends in China who felt like they too are being misunderstood and misrepresented. Thanks for your question, Dima.
Thank you. We have another question, yes, from Dima. Do you think that the massive focus on what Chinese eat is really something to consider in creating diseases? And will we witness... Sorry, there was a second question to this. Will we witness a multipolar new world order, reconsidering political systems from neoliberalism to socialism?
Nice, Dima, with a really chill question. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So first, let's talk about food. This has been a really good reminder that China's not rich yet. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a story of China that we like to tell where everywhere just looks like Shanghai. And not even like most of Shanghai, just the richest parts of Shanghai. We talk about Chinese billionaires, we talk about Chinese pop stars, we talk about Chinese success stories. Like, we either talk about the bad government or the 1%. So China, the per capita GDP is still around $10,000. It's over 40,000 in the United States. It's known as the world's middle class, which means that you have some very wealthy people, but there's a lot of the country that's still totally a developing country. And so you could tell a lot about a country by the diseases it gets. A viral disease based on basically Chinese medicine in an uneducated part of Wuhan, in an inland part of the country. Like, Wuhan is developing, but there are parts of it that are still very underdeveloped. You know, this virus is a developing country virus. And so it's a reminder what China is. In the United States, we have developed country diseases. We have obesity, we have diabetes, we have Alzheimer's, we have opioid addiction. Like, those are luxurious diseases. In China, like, there's still a lot of the country that's not developing at the rate that we imagine. And so is it important? It is important. And a lot of wet markets are going to be shut down now. And I will say no one is better incentivized to solve this problem for China than the Chinese government. And the one thing about the Chinese...
There's a little bit of cut.
All right.
Yeah.
I lost you. Sorry. Whenever you freeze, I'm just going to stop saying things.
I am here. Yes. Yes. Okay. Good point. Good take.
So one thing to remember, and I'm going to leave it at this, is when the Chinese government realizes it has a problem, it can act fast.
I'm sorry. There we are again.
Yeah. Okay, no worries. I feel like it's probably me.
No, it's the network.
Okay. Well, basically, we need to worry about it, but I will say China is worrying about it a lot. And when the Chinese government decides something's important, it changes.
Yes, you were saying when the Chinese governments decide, sorry.
When the Chinese government decides something's important, it can change. And it will change. And it can change in very fast and decisive ways. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, right? Like, it just depends on if the thing that they're deciding is good. And so in this case, China is going to take major steps to work on food safety. They don't want this to happen again to their economy, to their people, and then, of course, the global economy.
Right, right. So Nadim has another question, but first we have a question from Bilend. Hi, Zach. I have questions for both of you. How Chinese entrepreneurs leverage the potentiality of having a diaspora community? And Valentina, how refugee entrepreneurs leverage their connections back home?
Would you like
Do
to
you
go
want?
first, Valentina?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to take over the Chinese conversation, which is
I'm
getting so
curious too.
exciting. But what I can say is that so it depends. It really depends on the nationalities because in some countries where refugees are coming from, and these countries are still undergoing civil war, as the case of Syria, as the case of Afghanistan, there's civil war or occupation. There's political issues that sometimes undermine those relationships with the diaspora or with the communities back home. But then you have a lot of organizations already in place, particularly in the Arab world, that are based, for example, in Silicon Valley. There's TechWadi, for example, and they leverage on diaspora communities to support, invest, and promote entrepreneurship in the Arab world. So with Startups Without Borders, it's one thing that we're trying to do. We're trying to connect with diaspora communities and communities back home as well to support these entrepreneurs that are newcomers in new lands. I hope I answered your question, Bilend. Moving on to Zach's question, how Chinese entrepreneurs are leveraging having a diaspora or the potential of having a diaspora.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about China versus a place like India, um, China and India are often compared, and they're similar in a lot of ways. One of the ways that they're similar is that they actually have a lot of different cultures internally. So they're both notably provincial. India has dozens of languages, depending on where you're at.
Yeah.
One of the major differences between the two is that China has worked really hard to unify the country. In some ways, that a lot of us find a bummer, but in terms of doing business, are very helpful. So, for instance, in India, where they still speak a lot of different languages, and now a lot of people speak English, that's the business language alongside Hindi for the most part. Um, but English is seen as sort of like, it gives you access to the outside investment community in particular. In China, everyone in the country now speaks Mandarin. And so if you're doing business, you can do it in the same language. And 95 to 96% of the population is actually Han Chinese. So they're one ethnicity of Chinese. Um, and and so while there is um, a lot of differences within China as a country and the population, um, there's actually much more of the same. And so why so many Chinese companies have been able to be so successful is because there's over 800 million people on the internet and they all speak the same language. They're all in the same internet ecosystem because of the Great Firewall. So it's a little bit engineered. They're all paying attention to the same content. They're all paying attention to the same celebrities. Uh, they have a similar cultural background. Uh, and so you just have this massive, massive market. Like you could unify, if you took all of Europe, you'd still be half of the Chinese market, right? The thing about Europe is they all speak different languages, they'd have different
Yeah.
laws. Um, we're seeing that there are parts that don't really like each other. Like there's different styles and parts of it that mean it's a much different set of markets. China's far more unified than that. And so the great advantage in China is you could have a niche product and target 1% of the population. 1% of the population is 14 million people. Uh, so like, you could probably find somebody who's really interested in your weird invention that only works for AI engineers who are trying to save 5 minutes of every hour by optimizing this little thing. Because there might be like 500,000 of those people.
Right. Right. We're going to take the last question. So from Nadim, he's saying, so how is the numbers hitting developed countries more?
So India is another good example. The big fear for a lot of folks is that I've spoken to, and I get, I met through some of these conferences. I've met some folks who are pretty tapped in, and the big fear is that it starts to hit developing countries in a way that it hasn't yet. Part of this has to do with travel and mobility. A lot of executives who are traveling around the world, a lot of tourist destinations. Like, it's no surprise that Italy got hit hardest. Italy is the #1 tourist destination in the world. And so, you look at the patterns of human movement, and the places where it's been focused are either sort of surprising, like Iran was a little bit surprising for a lot of people. Italy was not. The United States was not. China clearly is not. And then if you look at all the places that Chinese people travel to, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Thailand, which is largely, the testing regime there isn't up to speed, so we don't really know what's going on there. It's a little bit more predictable than you'd expect. The big concern of most people I talk to is that it hits a place that is not. In India, from what I hear, is the nightmare, and I don't want to despair. Like, I have a lot of love for India as well. To me, it's one of the most exciting places in the world. I've been talking to a lot of entrepreneurs there. I've been talking to a lot of young people there. But you have really high density of population. You have infrastructure that isn't coordinated across provinces or states, in much the same way that the U.S. is the same, but we're not nearly as population dense. And then you have, they have a fifth of the per capita GDP as China. And so should it erupt in a place like India, then the concern is, with the global community tax the way that it is, India won't be able to handle itself as well. Now, India has taken a lot of low-tech precautions, which I think is great. Like, the police are making people go home. It's what you have to do, like flatten the curve. But it's right now been concentrated where there's large streams of people going back and forth, and specifically emanating from China. So I pray and I hope that it's the developed countries, or countries that are well suited to take on the challenge. I fear that it won't be. And frankly, in the same way that China is donating a lot of supplies to these developed countries, ventilators, masks, my hope, and I think it'll be a real test of China's class and poise, is that if things do deteriorate in developing countries, that they will support there too. I also expect it because, like I said, with companies, it's a tool of statecraft to be able to support people when they're hurting. Because if you support people when they're hurting, they're going to want to stand by you when they get better.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Zach. We've extended way longer than we expected initially. Thank you so much to everyone for your questions and for being there. Stay safe, Zach. Thank you so much. Please keep us updated with your next book and your next project. Where can people contact you, by the way?
So you can shoot me a message on LinkedIn. You could shoot me a message on Twitter. You could also, actually, either of those two places are great ways to do it. I have time right now. So if you guys want to send me some questions, or, now I want to be supportive of your community, Valentina. I think it's really amazing what you do. And so any way that I could be helpful, don't hesitate to reach out. And, stay healthy, stay safe, stay secure. And any way that I could be helpful in that process, definitely let me know.
Thank you so much. As I'm saying every day, kind of ironically, happy quarantine. Let's try to make the best. Let's try to make the best of this time. And thank you once again. Take care.
Cheers, everybody. Take care. Stay healthy.